In 3 of the major treatises of the Talmud are found extensive passages which give legal endorsement to seduce and marry 3-year-old baby girls. In fact, many of the greatest rabbis of the Talmud, including Simeon ben Yochai, upheld this privilege. Today in Israel, thousands of Jews go to Meron every year to venerate the memory of Simeon ben Yochai, one of the most respected rabbis in the history of Judaism.
In one of dozens of endorsements of child sex, when a grown-up man has intercourse with a little girl, it is nothing, for when the girl is less than this, 3 years and a day, it is as if one put the finger into the eye. The footnote to this passage says, as tears come to the eye again and again, so does virginity come back to the little girl under 3 years. The same section confirms that sexual activity with small boys is in the same category. The intercourse of a small boy is not regarded as a sexual act. The Talmud provides generous loopholes for adultery. It says the penalty for adultery does not include sex with a minor, the wife of a minor, or the wife of a heathen. The Talmud also encourages seduction of unwed adolescent girls called designated bondmaids. But it's important how such rapes are performed. With the designated bondmaid, one is guilty only in the case of natural connection, but not in the case of perverse connection. The Pharisees reasoned that rape in a perverted manner is outside the jurisdiction of the law. Normal rape, however, was punishable. It is true, because of the wickedness of the Canaanites, which included sodomy and infant sacrifice, Israel had been commanded by God to be harsh in her treatment of the inhabitants of the land. God made it clear that the Canaanites were not simply to be avoided, but destroyed.
Yet it's critical. Even homicidal attitudes toward Gentiles might have been lifted out of the book of Joshua. However, the quickest way to grasp the Talmudic view of Gentiles is not directly from the Talmud, but from the Jewish encyclopedias. If we quote an isolated opinion from the Talmud, a rabbi may quickly object, saying, but that is not the overall opinion of the Talmud. That is not the definitive view. What the Jewish encyclopedia provides us is a definitive overview of perhaps hundreds of rabbinic statements on any subject, giving us accurate summaries of what the Talmud generally teaches.
In its article on Gentiles, the Jewish encyclopedia begins to define what makes a Jew so different from a Gentile. Since Gentiles are not men in the fullest sense, so the Gentile is not a neighbor of a Jew. Further, since Gentile laws were too crude to admit of reciprocity, meaning too crude to be taken seriously, the Gentile was forever beneath the Jew. Gentiles were outlawed by God from the beginning, and thus had no property rights. The Almighty offered the Torah to the Gentile nations also, but since they refused to accept it, he withdrew his shining legal protection from them and transferred their property rights to Israel, who observed his law. Since the Talmud outlawed the child, or issue of a Gentile, as that of a beast, a Gentile had as little legal rights in a Jewish court as did an animal. The Talmud states that if a Gentile sue an Israelite, the verdict is for the defendant, the Israelite. Conversely, if the Israelite is the plaintiff, he obtains full damages. Because the Talmud conspires against Gentiles, if a Jew was ever caught telling a Gentile what the Talmud really says, such a person deserves death. So vile was the nature of a Gentile that the great Simeon ben Yochai said, "The best among the Gentiles deserves to be killed. The best of snakes ought to have its head crushed." Jews, however, are exalted beings in the Talmud, worthy of praise. Christ, "I thank thee, Lord, that I am not as other men." An eminent Talmudic rabbi says the same. "Blessed be thou, who hast not made me a Goy," or Gentile. There is a special antagonism between the Talmud and Jesus. The Talmud attacks him everywhere it can, even his mother. Mary, the Talmud says, was a whore who mated with carpenters. She who was the descendant of princes and governors played the harlot with carpenters. It naturally followed that the scribes declared Christ to be a bastard. In its article on Jesus, the Jewish Encyclopedia says that Jewish writings defame Christ. It is the tendency of all these sources to belittle the person of Jesus. The Talmud says they subjected him to 4 deaths: stoning, burning, decapitation, and strangling. The Talmud also says he is now in hell, punished with boiling hot excrement. The Jewish Encyclopedia quotes Jesus as telling us above all to bless the Jews. He says, "Further their well-being, do nothing to their detriment. Whoever touches them touches even the apple of his eye." Christians, as followers of the false prophet Jesus, also deserve death. The Jewish Encyclopedia again recaps the Talmud's position. A Gentile observing the Sabbath deserves death. The writings of Christians deserve to be burned, for paganism is less dangerous than minute or Christianity. The Jewish Encyclopedia, in its article on men, continues to illustrate the Talmudic hatred of Christianity. It was forbidden to partake of meat, bread, or wine with the Christian. Scrolls of the law, tefillin, and mezuzot written by a Christian were burned. An animal slaughtered by a Christian was forbidden food. The relatives of the Christian were not permitted to observe the laws of mourning after his death, but were required to assume festive garments and rejoice. The testimony of a Christian was not admitted in evidence in Jewish courts, and an Israelite who found anything belonging to one who was a Christian was forbidden to return it to him.
The Pharisees, through their Talmud, thus gave the Jews an ethic which encouraged bigotry and isolation. But it did worse than that. It invited persecution. By the 11th century, the inhabitants of Babylon, growing weary of the self-righteousness and dishonesty of the Jews, expelled them to the west.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا فيكم، وأنا أشكر مختار الشرفي والأستاذة أمل، وأنا أشكر كل الصحفيين وأشكركم أنتم. فأنا صح أنني هربت من أهلي، صح أنا ما عاد أشتيش عندهم، خلاص أنا أعيش عند عمي. إيش براءة الطفولة؟ إيش ذنب الأطفال من تتزوجوهم كذا؟ يعني مثلا أنا بحل مشكلتي، صح؟ بس بعض الأطفال براءتهم ما يحلوش مشكلتهم، يمكن يموتوا، يمكن ينتحروا، يمكن يفعلوا اللي براسهم، لأنهم أطفال ما يدروش بحاجة، يعني عندهم ما تعلموش ولا درسوا ولا حاجة. يعني إيش ذنبنا إحنا؟ مش الوحيدة أنا، يمكن كل الأطفال. في ناس كثير، بعض الأطفال يعني دبزوا بنفسهم في البحر ما عاد باقي. يعني إيش البراءة هذه؟ هذه ما إيش براءة. صح انني انا هربت من عند عمي ما كانش موجود، فاني اتصلت لعبد الجبار يجيبني، وعبد الجبار جاب لي بنت وسافرت انا اياها للحديدة، وعمي لما عرف بالموضوع اجاني. وكمان امي بلغت علينا الشرطة، انا عمري 11 سنة وتشتي تزوجني. يعني ما فيش حياة، ما فيش تعليم، ما فيش قوة، ما فيش بين قلبهم رحمة. إيش هذه التربية معهم؟ الموت أرحم لي، إنني أموت ولا أبقى. أنا أفضل أن أكون عند عمي ولا أفضل عندهم يقتلوني، يهددوني، يقولوا لي إذا رحتي عند عمك بنقتلك. يعني إيش هذا؟ إيش تهديد؟ يهددوا الأطفال. يرضيكم زيي أنا كذا ها يزوجوني؟ يرضيكم؟ وكمان أنا عادي، القتل عندي عادي، ولا أعيش عندهم. قتلوا أحلامنا، قتلوا كل شيء اللي فينا، يعني ما باقي. هذه ما هي عاد تربية، هذه قدرناها إجرام. خالتي وهي خالتي عمرها 13 سنة، فعلت سنة مع زوجها وقبت الغاز وتروشت به وماتت. يعني كان يشل الحدايد هو يسكر، وبينه مرض وبينه كل شيء. يعني يرضيكم إنه يعني نتزوج؟ يرضيكم؟ يا أم اقنعي مني، يا أهلي اقنعوني، أنا ما اشتيكمش، خلاص دمرتوا أحلامي كلها.